Good afternoon. My name is Charlotte Potter-Kasich. I'm the interim director here at the Barry Art Museum. The Barry Art Museum is located on the Old Dominion University campus in Norfolk, Virginia. We were founded by art collectors Richard and Carolyn Barry, and we opened our doors to the public in November of 2018. The permanent collection has strong holdings in contemporary glass, modernist paintings, marine paintings, and historic dolls and automatons. This afternoon, I'm pleased to welcome you to the second section of our 2020 Fall Virtual Lecture Series. This new free series was developed to help bring our collection to life with behind-the-scenes conversations from artists around the globe. We're very grateful to the Office of Community Engagement at ODU for helping to produce this new series of artist lectures. Today, we're honored to feature the remarkable career and mind of Karen LaMonte. Karen is an internationally renowned sculptor, best known for life-size cast glass dresses. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Karen began her artistic career in 1990, following her graduation from the Rhode Island School of Design. LaMonte traveled to Prague in 1999 on a Fulbright scholarship to work in the world-class Czech glass casting workshops. During her Fulbright year, she made her first life-size work, Vestige, a glass dress that suggests an absent wearer by revealing the form from a body. This ongoing series of sculptures is a reinvention of the traditional portrayal of the nude, and an aspect that has become more pronounced as Lamonte works with live models to build her forms. Next slide, please. Karen has been exhibited in galleries and museums internationally. Here's an example of some of the public collections that she's in just the US alone. Next slide, please. Right here in Norfolk, Virginia, we have a number of pieces of Karen's work. Drawing on her classical aesthetics at the Chrysler Museum of Art in Norfolk, they displayed a number of Karen's works in her 2009 exhibition, Contemporary Amongst the Classics, which combined classical sculpture with contemporary works to highlight stylistic continuations across time periods and generations. Next slide, please. Here you can see it in the galleries in context. Next slide, please. Karen LaMonte's Nocturne series take night as their subject, hoping to capture the atmospheric essence of night as John Field and Frédéric Chopin had done in their nocturne compositions. LaMonte designs and sews evening dresses to make forms that wrap the female body in the night. Selecting materials that communicate twilight and deep night, white bronze, shades of blue glass, and rusted iron, LaMonte creates figures that evoke feelings and social dynamics we associate with nighttime. Next slide, please. Some of these figures are modeled in reclining positions, LaMonte's subtle way of subverting the tradition of the odalisque as she removed the solid nude, leaving behind a hollow dress. Next slide, please. Here at the Barry Art Museum, we have one of her more intimate works. It's a child's dress. It's on view in our historic doll and automaton gallery, juxtaposing Karen's contemporary miniature sculpture with our fashion dolls across the centuries. Next slide, please. Much of LaMonte's new work focuses now on clouds, weather, and climate change. Elements that, keeping with themes she's explored before, shape and reflect our identities, lifestyles, our very existence. In her 2017 sculpture, Cumulus, which she modeled in collaboration with climatologists to pinpoint the coordinates of an actual cumulus cloud, is the first complete work in LaMonte's developing series of weather-related sculptures, which she's going to share with you more now. I want to point out that Karen is using a slightly different methodology today. She's going to be showing videos and then offering a Q&A session that all of you get to participate in. So as you're watching, I invite you to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. Please start to type in questions that you'd like me to ask as the moderator. And without further ado, I give you Karen LaMonte.
Idea of how to share my work is I've made videos, very complex, rich videos with a lot of content on various topics. So I have 3 for today. The first one is about materials. talking about each material I use, why I'm attracted to it, what I'm hoping to express with the material. The second one is about the floating world body of work I made, which is inspired by experiences I had in Japan. And the third one is about nocturnes. But what we're going to do is take a pause in between each of the videos so we can have a little chat. So it's very content rich, then a chat, and we repeat that cycle 3 times. So I will start now with the materials video. This is the moment when an idea literally takes shape. Molten metal is poured into a mold, and as it solidifies, the thoughts behind the sculpture take a visible form. All of my sculptures begin with an idea. My job as a sculptor is to give these thoughts physical presence through the materials I choose. Ceramic, iron, bronze, and glass all have their own personalities and their own way of refracting my ideas. To me, materials are very much alive. I use them as metaphors for body, culture, and the environment. Clay is the humblest of all materials. It is simply earth, universally used in every culture to create functional and symbolic objects. Clay was used to make some of the very first human forms, the prehistoric Venus figurines. Those early ceramic sculptures resonate through the ages with the theme of feminine beauty in my own work. Clay is the shared flesh of our common humanity. Iron conflates the human, the natural, and the industrial. It runs in veins in the earth, a blood to the flesh of our planet. The iron heart of our planet generates the magnetic shield which allows us to live on its surface, and our iron machines reshape it. When I cast my sculptures in iron, it illustrates both our vitality and vulnerability, our strength and our decay. Rusting iron eloquently speaks to human and environmental fragility. Like us, it is perpetually transforming, and it too is mortal. In contrast, bronze is an engineered alloy. It embodies our dream of immortality. It is a timeless material that we use to record victories and failures. Our history is written in bronze monuments, artifacts, and archaeological finds. The empty dresses I create are intimate and personal, but rendered in bronze, they become part of that monumental tradition. For the nocturnes, I used white bronze because it glows with the cool light of evening. This work, Cumulus, is a cloud carved in marble. The material makes the enormous size of clouds tangible, literally bringing the sky down to the earth. When we touch it, we can imagine both its weight and its transience. Marble is formed underground, like slow churning clouds frozen in time. Marble also evokes the skeletal remains of ancient civilizations, the statuary and temples of fallen empires. Glass is a material I return to again and again because it is rich in contradictions that fascinate me. It is strong but enigmatic and ethereal. It weaves together the visible and the invisible. I use glass for the strength and subtlety to reinterpret the female nude. The transparent clothing reveals traces of a body without a biography. The empty glass dress becomes a lens that examines culture and identity. Colored glass gives these works, the nocturnes, a distinct shade of meaning. The ancient Egyptians thought that precious blue stones and glass were actually pieces of the heavens. I used this glass to make absent female forms rising from penumbral garments. The shadowy color is a figuration of night. Okay,
Hi, Karen. That was wonderful.
we are back. We are ready for questions, a little chat. Looking
Um,
forward.
yeah, so I was actually going to start. I have some questions. I've been waiting for so long. To help give everybody, all our viewers at home, some context, I happen to know that your native material is glass, or that you studied glass at the Rhode School of Design. Can you talk a little bit about where you live and who you work with to fabricate all of these artworks, especially when you're starting to dive into these other materials?
Yeah. So I live in Prague in the Czech Republic, and I have for almost 21 years, which is amazing for me to think about. It's like, wow, time just flew by. But so in the Czech Republic, I work with about 3 different glass foundries that were primarily, a group of people worked all at the same foundry under communism. And it was experimentation that was funded by the communist government at that time. And anybody who is an artist realized what that means is that they had no bills. So they were taking a lot of risks, and they were able to get to a place that was very unique with glass casting. And Professor Lubinsky and Mrs. Brichtova were really at the center of that development that was unique in the Czech Republic. And then all of the people who worked at that single foundry sort of split off, and now there are about 3 different foundries that are a result of that early development. So in the Czech Republic, I work with all of those people. And then for metal, I work with one place in the Czech Republic, but then also another place in Italy, in a town called Pietrasanta, it's on the coast just above Pisa. And there's a huge sort of agglomeration of craftspeople there, working with all different aspects of material. Some people are doing mosaics, bronze casting, iron casting, forging, construction, and also marble work, a lot of marble work. And actually, one of the tales is that Michelangelo hid out there when he owed somebody in Florence money. So he was working actually from a lot of the same quarries where the marble is still coming from today. So it's really in the midst of a rich tradition, which is very exciting.
Wow, that's
Yes,
really exciting. Oh,
yes.
that's fantastic. And maybe dovetailing on that, we just got a question in. Are there materials that you've yet to use that are on the horizon that you're excited about working with?
I'm, the song by Madonna, I'm a material girl living in a material world. Like, that's very much how I feel, I'm really interested in the way things work on almost a atomic or molecular level. I had the amazing opportunity to be an artist in residence at Sullivan Park, which is Corning's research headquarters. And I thought, oh, I've been working with glass for almost 30 years. This is a material I know, right? Well, at Sullivan Park, I experienced an entirely different dimension of the material that I know and love. And I was introduced to a group of something called bioglasses that I had no idea existed before that. And these are glasses that are designed to either intentionally be unstable, so they integrate into your body, or to be completely inert to your body, so they can replace things like bone and tooth in your body. So those are materials I literally just have taken my first little taste of, and they're absolutely thrilling. I see, every time I'm out in the world, I see new materials that I'm curious about. Wood, paper. I love paper. I did an early project in the 90s before I left New York City, where I was an intern at a place, a paper mill called Dieudonné, a sort of artist paper mill. And I took an outfit of my own clothing and turned it into paper for a sketchbook. But I've been so terrified to use that paper that I still have it as a stack in my studio. So maybe someday I'll use that paper for something.
That's fascinating, especially considering all of the other materials are so strong. I mean, something as fragile as paper sounds really fast, that material transformation.
Yeah.
We have a lot of excellent questions that are popping up here. So I'm just going to jump in. How much do your pieces weigh, and is that a factor in your design process? Obviously, metal, clay, marble, and glass all weigh different, but do you change your techniques when you're working with different mediums?
Well, the techniques change because of the mediums. For example, so glass, so iron, bronze, and glass are all cast the way I use them. They can be fabricated, but the way I use them, they're cast. Glass, because of the way the material flows when it's warm, the wall thickness of a casting needs to be at least an inch, so 2.5 centimeters. Bronze can be a couple of millimeters,
Wow.
but iron needs to be a little bit more than bronze. Iron needs to be about 5 millimeters because it needs more body. It's actually more fragile than bronze. And it can crack when it gets too thin. So the materials themselves do sort of define their different needs. And so in weight, that means that, so the glass pieces often weigh up to 600 pounds. The iron pieces are a little bit lighter at about 400. And the bronze are the lightest at about 300. And the ceramic, I do work with ceramic also now. The ceramic pieces are about 250. So
Interesting. It's interesting, those different weights. Somebody here is saying, what about plastic?
What about
if you are a material girl and a material
I am a material girl. There is something, there's some little itch I have in the back of my brain that I want to go into the ocean and sweep up all that plastic, sort of net it all up and turn it into a sculpture so that it's, but plastic, it bothers me and fascinates me at the same time. If I were to work with plastic, it would have to be recycled. That's my thought, is that I would have to be solving a second problem, taking that plastic from somewhere where it's making trouble and put it to good use somewhere else.
Interesting. Okay, so we're like down a serious technical rabbit hole over here in the Q&A. People are very excited about this, so we'll just go there. So we have people asking about the wax making process in and of itself, which is a pretty big topic. And then we also have people asking about like maquettes, whether or not you make maquettes before you get into making the full scale work and things like that.
Okay, so first, the easier question to answer is the maquettes. I do make maquettes, and I started doing that because I use a lot of real cloth, and the cloths have different components, polyester, cotton, linen, and all of those fabrics behave, first of all, visually differently when I'm doing the compositions on the figures with the fabric, and then technically differently when I'm going through the preparation process towards casting. So I use a lot of things like hairsprays and glues, and the fabrics need to get sealed by the hairspray, but not too sealed because then they won't absorb the glues. So a lot of things can go wrong. So I got into the practice, especially with the nocturnes, of taking a fabric completely through, first of all, making a maquette of the piece that I wanted to make in large scale, and taking the fabrics all the way through those various steps to make sure that they wouldn't react badly at a certain point. So yes, I do make maquettes, and it's to test my vision and the viability of the fabrics I've chosen to work with. And another thing that kind of happened simultaneously is that I became aware of a project that was done in the just after World War II in Paris called Théâtre de la Mode. And I covered that in the last video, but it's about some small scale works that were very inspirational towards me sort of focusing more intensely on small scale maquette works.
That's right. We're going to touch on that in a little bit.
Yeah. That's not next video, but the next video. And then making waxes, I mean, that is sort of my daily activity in the studio. I start by making a shell off of the figures that I have there, and then dressing that shell, and then, as I mentioned, adding all of the, hairspray and glues to the fabrics, and then working to fill undercuts. So wax is really a material that I am intimately familiar with. And then once I make those positives, that sort of master positive, I work with a bronze casting foundry to make rubber negatives and then pure wax positives again. And that kicks off the glass casting process.
Interesting. I never really thought about this before, but are some of them made in series? I always just assumed they were all one-off, but I guess once you have that master, sometimes do you cast the same form?
Yes.
With multiple materials?
Well, for the first 5 years, we couldn't figure out how to make those molds, those rubber molds off of the master positives. And, that was such a tenuous period because what I was trying to do inside of these foundries was technically possible, but hadn't been done before. Like, all the skills were in place, like all the knowledge was in place, but the way I saw things and what I was trying to achieve was different than what had been done there traditionally. And so there was a lot of failure. This is the thing, the message to young artists is, you're onto something good when everything is going wrong. because if not, you're just repeating what's been done in the past, So it was a period of huge experimentation for all of us. And the failures were at that point fatal because I didn't have this master positive to go back to. Like, we were literally pulling the dresses out of the molds. And I mean, it was just such a raw period of experimentation. But then once we figured out how to make those rubber molds, then I was able to work in series, and make editions of the work. And if one segment failed, that was the big deal. Instead of the whole thing going to the trash pile, actually we could remake that segment. And that was a lifesaver.
Maybe it's worth just sort of mentioning, since we are on this technical rabbit hole, that they are created in sections.
Yes.
Right, because when I first saw your work, I always just assumed it was one massive casting, which of course is almost impossible. Probably is impossible, actually. And that they are these different sections that get like seamlessly fit together that probably the average viewer wouldn't know.
Yeah.
Okay, so how did you first develop your fascination with fashion?
I was traveling in 1997. I left the United States and was traveling around in Asia and a lot of places where I didn't speak the language. And so I started reading people in a different way than through spoken words. I started looking at body language, clothing, and all of these kind of things. And that became, in my mind, a language. And then I started looking at a lot of classical artwork and, the ideas sort of how all human bodies are the same, but then when we clothe ourselves, this idea of clothing is costume, that you could clothe yourself to send out a certain message, and I have a lot of friends who are actors and actresses, and I watch them change roles all the time. And that's kind of amazing because it's like, wait a minute, I thought I knew you. Now you're someone different, but it's just different clothing, different presentation. And so I started seeing this as a language that I wanted to work with.
That's fascinating. Okay, this one person starts to go down a slightly different, I think I'm going to touch on male versus female after the next video because there's a whole thing there, but there's a lot of questions around that. Have the cast figures of Pompeii influenced your work at all?
Yes, actually. There is a figure, in my studio, I have all different things on the wall, and there is a figure that I look at almost every day of somebody crouched in almost a fetal position. And I always think, what an incredible moment, so those are very
Frozen.
influential. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. How do you transport your glass pieces, and what do those
Ah,
crates look like?
yes. The crates are beautiful. Each segment has its own crate made. And they are, padded with foam and wrapped in a moisture wicking fabric, and transported in their various segments and then reunited once they land at their destination.
Perfect. Do you think that's a good idea to go into our next destination?
Yes, I was thinking
Okay.
maybe next week. Okay, so now we are going to after I did the first sort of group of dresses in 2007, I had an idea to challenge myself by submerging into a new culture, different aesthetics, and I received a 7-month research fellowship to go to Japan. So the next video is about that and the result of that experience. I am fascinated by the way the human body is both personal and universal. As my body, it is specific, imperfect. But as the body, it is an object, part of a cultural ideal. For 10 years, I worked with the female nude as a timeless symbol of beauty. I contrasted the fragile, absent figure with an opulent cast dress to explore the tension between private and public space, exposing the personal layer under these sumptuous expressions of culture. As I made these sculptures, I became aware that my visual vocabulary was myopic, wholly informed by Western aesthetics and ideals. I became captivated with the idea that at their core, clothing and bodies are neutral, without inherent meaning, and if viewed through a different cultural lens, they would appear completely differently. I decided to test my theory by going to Japan. After working with the rich drapery of Western dress, the kimono appeared austere. It fascinated me as the anti-dress. In 2007, I began a 7-month research fellowship through the Japan-US Friendship Commission. I lived in Kyoto, in the traditional kimono-making district of Nishijin, which hummed with the sound of kimono production. I studied all aspects of the craft, and I loved it. From dyeing the silk to weaving the fabric and drawing the imagery, it was a completely amazing experience. I was taken under the wings of people devoted to traditional methods. I immersed myself in the culture of the kimono, which involved, among other things, joining my new friends on Friday nights for lessons washed down with glass after glass of shochu. In all cultures, clothing is an unspoken language, but the kimono is perhaps the most codified. Every element of its design, the imagery, the sleeve length, the obi type, and the way it's tied is highly significant. Putting on a kimono is assuming a role in society, a role proclaimed by the language of the kimono. In place of the West's preoccupation with the self, the Japanese idea of beauty is focused on the idea of a greater group. When a woman puts on a kimono, she must create a cylinder, the ideal shape to display the imagery. Her defining curves are eliminated through padding and binding. Her specific body is irrelevant. The beauty of the clothing supersedes the beauty of its wearer. Once I was back in my studio, I grappled with the concept of non-individual beauty. Instead of the absent body I had worked with in the past, I was now faced with one which had been erased, incorporated into a greater group, a body more significant than any single individual. Eventually, I found insight in Mu, the Buddhist notion of emptiness. Mu is not a variant of the Western nihilistic nothingness. Instead, it is the empty sky which contains the universe. With this in mind, I started working with biometric data from NASA and fabricated a precise mannequin of the median 40-year-old woman, an average every woman or an exact no woman, a female representation of Mu. As I started dressing my every woman, I realized more than ever how fluent I was in the Western vernacular of opulence and drapes, and how the Japanese expression of beauty was the radical departure I had hoped for. It was extremely challenging. I began to work in a spare and minimalistic way. I became more attentive to materials. Thinking of the kimono as a vessel for an erased body, I worked with clay for its humility, bronze for its tradition, rust for its transience, and glass because it embodies the contradiction of presence and absence. I found that my thinking parallels the aesthetic philosophy wabi-sabi, which is centered on the celebration of impermanence and prizes imperfection, asymmetry, simplicity, and the marks of time. I found particular kinship in kintsugi, where broken objects are repaired with gold, leaving scars visible and highly valued. From the beginning, I worked with kintsugi by intentionally drying ceramic in a way that caused cracks. Once, a kiln error caused the temperature to skyrocket, and 3 sculptures inside exploded. It was an opportunity for an extreme repair. I gathered all the pieces of unglazed terracotta and spent months putting them back together. I spent a total of 8 years building the whole body of work I call Floating World. It is a translation of Yukio, the name of the pleasure quarters in Edo, Japan, filled with geisha, maiko, and kabuki actors, floating above mundane existence. It is a world that was made famous by the Yukio-e woodblock prints. It is these images of exotic beauty which influenced the 19th century avant-garde in Europe and the United States and gave birth to Japanisme. But what intrigued me most was the Japanese homophone for Yukio, meaning sorrowful world. This is the earthly plane of death and rebirth from which Buddhists seek release. Even the name of the pleasure quarters, where people go to forget everyday worries and indulge in bodily gratification, uses a language that tempers beauty with an awareness of impermanence.
Wow. So
We're back.
that was a radical departure for sure.
It was amazing. I was just watching that and I was thinking, I could have spent 7 years in Japan and learned something new every day. I mean, it was an extraordinary, extraordinary experience.
It's so different, so different. And so it's interesting. A question came in right as the movie was starting, and then you sort of answered it, but I'm going to circle back to it because I think it's important. Do you have parameters for choosing what body type you portray in your work? Does it have to be yourself, and why? I'm curious about the other varying body types and if they're influenced in your practice. So maybe returning back to some of the other work and then how you've moved into this work.
Sure. So first of all, I would never ask a professional model, to do anything I hadn't done myself. So I always do sort of throw myself out there first. And traditionally I used direct body casting. So that's putting the plaster bandages on your body and taking a mold. Recently I started in making the small figurine works, which I'm working on now. I use digital scanning. And I've never put any parameters on the type of body, but because the direct body casting is so physically strenuous, it was not possible to ask, or was not responsible to ask, someone who had any health issues, was above a certain age or pregnant or anything like that, to be a model if they would consider modeling. But with the digital scanning, that opens up a whole world to use older models. A friend of mine who was pregnant was actually a model, which was amazing. And, so I don't have a preconception. My idea is to show or to explore sort of the most inclusive vision of beauty that I can try to find. So in my ideal world, I would love to work with transgender people, you know,
Mhm.
every race, every creed, every orientation, you know. I live in a very sort of open and curious sort of state of mind where, you know, I
Mhm.
think the idea of beauty is constantly changing.
Mhm.
And right now we're at this moment where it's really broad, and I would hope that, you know, eventually my work would encompass that breadth.
Interesting. Well, so I guess that's a perfect segue into, do you ever use male shapes? As you're talking about transgender, I just started imagining like
Yes,
that would be very, especially in glass, fascinating.
yes, would be very interesting. Well, men are more shy than women. I'm just going to throw that out there.
Mhm.
You know, I haven't pursued. I think with the digital scanning, it'll be a little less tenuous for men. You know, I think it'll be a more comfortable process, and so you know, hopefully, in a relatively short period of time, I will. Did someone just volunteer on
Yeah.
the little bar? Like, I'm
Who's going to
ready.
raise
I'm
their
ready.
hand to be the first nude model to fly to Prague?
Yeah, but no, I would love to work with men, you know. And I also have this idea, but also for me, there needs to be some conceptual framework that I'm exploring that fits. And so I've been thinking quite a bit about this idea of a hero. You know, that's a
Mm.
very male idea, like a stereotype, like what is a hero? And like, what
Mhm.
if we actually started sort of breaking apart this idea of being heroic, and like, what does a 21st century hero actually look like, you know?
Mm.
So those are just sort of
Interesting.
random
Superheroes.
thoughts. Yeah.
What does that superhero look like? And so, just so I'm clear, it sounds like you have been the model for some of these as well.
Yes. Yes.
Interesting. Okay.
I have
And did it sort of
direct body
start?
cast.
Did it sort of start there and then evolve out?
Yes. And I've done direct body casting of myself and digital scanning. And the digital scanning was much more comfortable.
Okay. Technology helping us out.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So when you're putting the exploded sculptures back together, what did you use to bind it? Did you
Mm.
then paint the gold on top of the patching, or is the gold itself the thing that's adhering?
Yes. So traditionally, you know, there are times where technically I have to sort of veer away from tradition. Traditionally, it was a like a resin with gold powder in it. That's what, you know, when they analyzed those repairs, that's what was used to repair like a small teacup. But I had a sculpture that, you know, had to fit together, and I also kind of had to bend it and get the. So we used little dots of a sort of semi-flexible universal glue, and then filled that in with a like a two-part adhesive, and then I gold leafed on top of that. Um,
Wow.
but I'm still terrified to move those pieces. You know,
Mm.
I've moved them once to an exhibition, and we moved them back, and I was like, okay, we're never doing that again. But
They'll be on view forever in my studio. Thank you.
yes.
um, so this is sort of a really open-ended question, but what is your favorite part of the creation process? Is it the genesis of the idea, the modeling, the fabrication? Where's the juiciness for you?
Well, actually, I think it's all the segments. I know that sounds like I love all my children, but because I think I would get bored if it was just one-sided. You know, if I was just doing the research all the time in the genesis, or if I was just fabricating, I think I would get bored in one role. And that's one thing I like about being an artist, is that you get to play these different parts, you know? So that's kind of fun.
Yeah, yeah. It definitely seems like, some artists, I feel like at your stage of career, they drop everything out. Somebody else fabricates everything. And it's clear that your hand is still very much involved in the process, and that level of craft and intentionality is still there. And so it's really, I feel like you feel that in the work itself.
Oh, thank you.
Um, are all of your kimonos large scale? I would love to see a smaller one in the Japanese area of the doll gallery.
Ah. The kimonos were the first time I made the small maquettes. And so I actually made about, I guess they're maybe 12 or 14-inch pieces in ceramic and in iron and in bronze.
Wow, that's fascinating.
And glass.
Actually,
And in glass.
in relationship specifically to the Berry Art Museum, that is really fascinating because, you know, we have a huge doll and automata collection, and everything, all these little fashion things are this size. And so it's really, your doll piece is so beautiful. Your child's dress in that space. Okay, I think, I'm just looking through them all. What is the large monumental sculpture always the goal of your practice? Or was there a moment when your practice was smaller or more solo? One relies on less fabrication and collaboration. So the question is sort of, yeah,
that's a
I'll
great question because I started small, geared up, and then now, like the most recent piece I made, the marble cumulus that's 2.5 tons, and this is just so outside the scale of the effort of one single human being. But that almost, I never thought of it as a reaction or a simultaneous thing. I started working on a very small scale as well with these very small figurines, so I've sort of started in a small to medium level, cycled up, cycled down,
coming back down.
And cycled in both directions kind of simultaneously, because there is something really satisfying about like being in your studio by yourself, tinkering away, and doing everything on your own. It's a great feeling, but then it's also a great feeling like, it's like being on a team or something, it's a solo run versus like a group soccer tournament or something, when you're working with a team of people, it's also really satisfying, and you get these really interesting, focused relationships that are about achieving this goal together,
Yeah, that's interesting. That's really interesting. That it's about the scale that sort of necessitates these larger teams of people and this cooperation. Yeah. Good. Okay, well, we still have more questions, but I think we may as well move forward.
Should we cycle to the nocturnes? Okay, so this is the most recent.
Okay.
We will go to video.
For almost 20 years, I have focused on the expression of iconic female beauty in fashion and figurative sculpture. I enjoy exploring the cultural transformation of the nude through dress. In 2009, I became focused on night, and I began to think about the human body in a much larger and more abstract context. I wanted to look at how we interpret the infinite space that surrounds us, how we place ourselves in it and try to find relevance in a largely indifferent universe. In the fields of science and art, I studied how we imprint the human figure on the infinite, thereby translating it into a language we can understand. Nyx, the goddess of night, and all of the constellations that we have mapped over time attempt to anthropomorphize the infinite. I became interested in making female figurations of night. I titled sculptures Nocturnes, and like the musical compositions of Chopin and John Fields, after which they are titled, I focused on atmosphere over narrative. I studied the biological science of night, as well as astronomy. For the first time, I used color in my glass sculptures. I worked with German scientists to create a color and density that would create penumbral garments. I wanted my nocturnal females to rise from a darkened pool, simultaneously emerging from and merging with the night. I sewed the garments myself, choosing fabrics for their texture or how they folded and draped. In my mind, connecting the textures and drapes of fabric with the qualities of light and atmosphere at nightfall. I wanted to wrap the female figure in dusk, exploring both beauty and darkness. I used dressmakers' mannequins to develop my designs. I enjoyed engaging with the lost art of couture and studied designers from all time periods. One of my great discoveries was the Théâtre de la Mode. At the end of World War II, while Paris was in ruins, celebrated artists in the fields of ballet, theater, and haute couture worked together to create a series of fashion figurines that were displayed on theater sets created by contemporary artists like Jean Cocteau. The small scale of the work with its large intention and effect mesmerized me. It was a declaration of the importance of beauty and culture. I titled my works Etudes in keeping with the musical nomenclature, but they are much more than studies for larger works. They celebrate the power of optimism and beauty. I became inspired to install the life-size sculptures in empty theaters, weaving together fashion, theater, and art, as the French project had. I was finally able to do this in the winter of 2016. We worked furiously to install and light the pieces in a very limited window between performances at the Historic Estates Theater in Prague. Unpacking my nocturnes in a theater where Mozart himself performed was a surreal experience, and we were all struck silent when we cleaned up the packing material and saw the moment we had created. I did a second installation at the Litomyšl Castle, a UNESCO World Heritage Site that has one of the last 5 Baroque castle theaters in Europe. It is the only one with complete sets of painted stage designs. The installations remind me of tableaux vivants of the 1800s, a particular form of performance art. Actors are both costumed and nude. They sit completely still. They create a living picture, like this one from 1857. At that time, it was illegal to move if you were nude, but fine to be nude if you were still. My installations are abandoned tableaux vivants. Clothing has taken on the forbidden sensuality of the body. Fabric has become flesh. I feel a resonance between the emptiness of the dresses, the empty theaters, and the empty darkness of night. The theaters are antique remnants of the past, which are assiduously preserved as artifacts. Working on their stages reminded me of the uncanny stillness we experience at night, walking in a city devoid of any sign of life. Like a set waiting for its players.
Wow. Do you feel like you finally found the final resting, like home for your work? And seeing it in the theater was just, I got chills.
Yeah, the theater installations were amazing. And the unusual thing is that like it was a vision that I had, so we did it, but no other people saw it. You know, it was all documented, like, you know, these moments were extracted through photography and documentation that way. But there was no audience, you know, which kind of makes it perfect. You know, it was a project for which there was no audience, no live audience, you know. So it was an amazing moment.
Ugh, it really is. I mean, and so that I'm understanding things, you also created the small pieces,
Yes.
but those were not ever exhibited there. Have you ever created small tableaus with them?
Well, you know what I thought? Czech Republic, one of the things that drew me to the Czech Republic was the history of puppet theater. And I thought, you know, there's this place called right in Prague 1 in Old Town, where they have a little stage, and I was like, oh, when I have a moment, you know, I'll ask if I could go down and do a little installation there. That would be really fun, you know. So maybe that's something to come.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I think the scale change feels relevant. And the other thing I keep on thinking about your work is how it started so bodily, and then it really ended up kind of going to the sky, you know, with Cumulus, and then it starts to come back down with Nocturne, and it comes right back into the body. And it's sort of interesting to see the arc of you, you know, sort of you like looking up and then looking back down and like more internally. That is not a question. That was one of those things where people pretend it's a question, but it's just a statement. I'm going to circle back to some of these things here as questions. One person is asking, these videos, would they ever be available to see again? They're enormously important. I guess one thing I can say is that this is being recorded, and we will have this recording in the Berry Art Museum archive.
Yes.
But in
And
terms of your,
they're on
perfect,
my
yeah,
website. You can
perfect.
go see them anytime on the website. They're on a YouTube channel. And actually, one of the sort of boons of COVID is I've been trying to figure out how to communicate with people, because exhibitions are off, everything's off. So we've continued down this video making sort of world, and I'm working on one now with my husband and studio manager Steve on techniques, to talk more specifically about techniques and why I think technique is so important to art making. And then we're going to cycle back and look at earlier exhibitions that maybe happened in Europe or happened 20 years ago that people haven't seen, and sort of so to communicate in this video format that people love so much right now, about what's happening in the studio now and what has happened in the past. So
Well, that might be a good segue to the next question, which is, how has COVID affected your practice, both good and
yeah,
bad? And what does your practice look like? Has there been significant changes because of it? I mean, the video
yeah,
seems like a great maybe evolution of your practice.
yeah. Well, it's interesting. When COVID started, I was at the tail end of working on a book, like a mid-career publication with Rizzoli. So the first 3 months of lockdown, we were at that phase. Every publication, they told me, has a cycle, and we were at the end where it's like checking all the details, and so that was really, in many ways, it was a blessing not to be distracted by anything else, because I really focused exclusively, like the whole studio, we focused on catching any little detail we could and proofreading and everything. And the publication just came out in September.
Hmm,
And it's beautiful. I mean, the
wonderful.
design team, they just did an incredible job. So that was kind of a lucky timing. So I didn't feel anything, but anything that was planned exhibition wise or anything like that really came to a halt. But exhibitions that were up then got extended, so
Mhm.
there's an exhibition up in Iowa that will be there until December or January, at the University of Iowa there, with their at the Brunier Art Museum. What's the title of the show? It's Contemplate Japan. So
Hmm.
it's a bunch of American artists and some Japanese works, that is up there. And interestingly, when outdoor spaces started opening, like I got a request from the Montgomery Museum in Alabama, and they requested, if I could loan a piece for the reopening of their sculpture garden, which I did. So there's a piece outside there now, an iron piece, one of the nocturnes. And so things haven't come to a screeching halt. Things have changed dramatically, and in some ways I feel almost like it reminds me of the period when I just got out of art school, where it's like where I have a lot of time to think abstractly and explore things without pressure for professional appearances or make something quickly. So I'm really able to take the time to think and explore in a way that I haven't had in a long time. So far for me, I think it's been very positive, and I
Hmm.
count myself as being very lucky for that.
Hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, there's silver lining everywhere. You just have to find it. Um, So this person asks, what was the motivation that lies behind the Cumulus series? We sort of touched on it really briefly, but we didn't really
Yeah.
dig into that.
Yeah. So after I'd done quite a bit of research for the nocturnes, and um, whenever I kind of get onto a topic, I see if there's any special interest groups out there. So I've loved clouds since I was a kid.
Mm.
I grew up next to a power plant in Stuyvesant Town on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, and I called it the Cloud Maker,
Mm.
because it was just churning away and like poofing up these clouds, and I really thought that's where clouds came from.
Wow.
um, and and so I joined something called the Cloud Appreciation Society. And the mission statement of the Cloud Appreciation Society is just to make people not think of clouds as like a negative thing, like ruining what could be a bright and sunny day, but that they're actually really interesting. And so I was reading a book by the founder of the society, Kevin Pinter-Piney, and I read that a cumulus cloud can weigh up to, you know, a certain number of tons, like 220 tons. And first of all, I was like, wait a minute, that's crazy, you know,
Clouds
but
have
then I thought
weight?
it through. Like a 220-ton cloud, like if you think about a rainstorm, like a real rainstorm, when the sky just opens up and everything comes pouring down, and you think about carrying a bucket of water, you know, so the cloud is just all this little particulate of water, and all of a sudden that weight became a possibility in my mind. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be interesting to make a sculpture where the weight of the cloud was proportionally correct in the weight of the sculpture. So I'd have to shrink the size of the cloud, but if I use like the specific gravity of the material I was working in, I could make a weight equivalency. So that was really, for the Cumulus project, that was my little sort of nerdy focus, was to make a weight equivalency between a marble cloud and a real cloud. And then the real cloud, it was a crazy endeavor, but I had all these different ideas that I was going to digitally scan a cloud with a giant group of drones. And I found all these graduate students like out in Arizona who were doing crazy things with photogrammetry and stuff like that. And I was like, all right, I'm gonna go work with them. We're gonna do this. And then clouds are changing so quickly, it was not possible to get like a single read. So then I think it was actually Kevin Pinter-Piney pointed me towards a group at Caltech who are modeling clouds. And he said, you know, if you need like a single shape at a moment in time, they would be the people to work with. So I worked with a group of climatologists at Caltech, and they had written an algorithm for simulating weather, and they ran that algorithm for about 5 days on a supercomputer, like a timeshare supercomputer on Lake Lugano in Italy, and came up with this field of clouds, you know, because it's a block of weather. And then we went into that field and isolated a single cloud, and that's the Cumulus cloud that I worked with.
Well, I'm glad we asked that question. I had no idea what had gone into the cloud. So was it important to you, the location of where the cloud came from? Because it's interesting. Well, I can tell certain things like really matter to you. And I was just curious.
Well, it wasn't, but it was really important to them. They were like, we wanted to give you a really beautiful sculptural cloud. So they had a data set from Barbados in like 1968 or 9 or whatever, pretty close to the year I was born. So I think of it as my birthday cloud. But, and so they took that data set, you know, and it has like moisture, blah, all the, you know, whatever information they need to put into the computer. And that was the data set that they ran to create that cloud. So it's from
That's
Barbados.
Kind of incredible.
Isn't that amazing?
It's like your birth cloud. Well, we're honing in on 3. So I think to end, I would say, what is your current project? I think you've touched on a couple, but is there something that we haven't touched on yet that you'd like to share with the audience? And the final thing is, somebody said, you're so prolific. Where can I buy your art? I'd give you an opportunity to answer that.
Okay. All right. So what I'm working on now, it kind of goes back to one of the first questions about materials and the last question about clouds. I have started looking at glasses, and this is all sort of coming out of the Corning experience, looking at glasses that physically create the same phenomena that we see in weather. So the reason why a cloud is white, although it's just a whole bunch of little particles of clear water, the reason why a cloud is white is because a phenomena called Mies scattering, M-I-E-S, Mies scattering. And so I'm working with very low density opal glasses to create the same phenomena of Mies scattering, and working with the cloud forms. So it's yeah, and so if we have the time and the patience, I'll just show one little image of a group of the clouds. We're going to my studio now. Let's go with that one. So we're in my studio now. So these are 3 things that I made actually at Corning. And something pretty amazing, in addition to how cool the glass is, I want to talk about the mold material, because I was pouring glass into digitally printed sand molds, which is a crazy thing. But if you think about it, if you look at anybody who knows a little bit about glass casting, glass expands when it's warm and shrinks as it's cooling. And so like all of these little areas, like the open holes where there's, you know, cloud around a little bit of air, like as those areas are shrinking, that would have been a natural break point for the glass. But the digitally printed sand is held together with a resin that breaks down over time and exposure to heat. So basically, from a practical point, I made these really complicated digitally printed sand molds with a resin binder, poured hot glass into them, and then came back, and the glass piece was sitting in the kiln on top of a pile of sand.
Stop it.
Yes.
It just disintegrated and was there waiting for you like a present.
Yes.
Oh, that is so rewarding.
This is the crazy thing. So no one had ever used this technology. This is how they're prototyping like engine blocks for car engines. You know, this is kind of stuff. It's crazy
Karen,
expensive.
can we click into one of those? Like, can we see a little closer?
Sure. Well, let's see.
I don't know.
There we go. Yeah. So, so this technology is crazy expensive right now. So it's not really like viable, available. But I think the potential for it. So there are two companies who do this right now, and we were in conversation with both of them before we started the experimentation. And one company, the tech, was saying this is impossible because the mold is just going to fall apart before the glass solidifies, because that's like the trick, is to have the glass solidify before the mold falls apart. Then the other tech from the other company was like, no, the mold is so strong it's just going to break the glass apart. So each was saying totally impossible for different reasons. So I was like, then that means it's totally going to work, because usually everybody's wrong at least halfway in one direction or another, right? So oh, and this is opal glass. So these are some of the these are glass ceramics, so they're not low density opals, but the glass ceramic actually does a similar thing to me scattering, like up in these upper areas where the glass has turned into ceramic. But these are opal glasses. Like this I did at the studio in Corning. Like as long as I was in the neighborhood, I was just kind of poking around to see what was possible. And so with Harry at the studio, we just poured this opal glass into some open face sand molds. And this is a different type of scattering called rally scattering. And rally scattering it's actually the reason why the sky is blue. And why sunsets are orange. So I'll let everybody look up rally scattering and me scattering on the web instead of me trying to explain in my life as a scientist. I get things kind of halfway correct. So that's my new thing, is working with glasses with very specific formulations, working to emulate phenomena that I see and am amazed by, and trying to sort of capture it and put it to work in the sculptural realm.
Amazing. This,
Crazy,
yeah,
right?
we could do a whole other conversation on this work.
I know.
Truly.
Yes.
So if people are interested in finding your gallery, where would they go?
Yes. So I work right now with Gerald Peters Gallery, and they're on the web. They have a space in New York City and a space in Santa Fe, New Mexico. So it's wonderful. Gerald Peters Gallery. And there was one, and the Rizzoli book just came out. So that's another place if you want to just look at, and all of this is covered in the Rizzoli book. Even I wrote a chapter on the most recent explorations with the sort of combination of scientific and artistic approaches. And I've also joined a group called the Sci Artists group. So there's actually a group of people who are kind of like me, which is pretty exciting. Artists who think like scientists, or scientists who think like artists. So, you know, that's pretty exciting. So that's it.
Great. It didn't used to be a division. It used to all be the same thing,
Yes,
Renaissance men.
exactly. There didn't used to be a division.
No more silos. So I'm going to offer to the audience, I'd be happy to follow up with the email. We're going to send you the link to some of the things that Karen just mentioned, as well as the link to this if you want to rewatch it. And then as we skate out, Karen, I wonder if you can share that PowerPoint that we started out with, and I'll close up with that. Wonderful.
Here we go.
So I know you guys can't all do it at the same time, but I would like to personally thank Karen. I've always really admired your work. It's absolutely incredible. It's such an honor and a pleasure to have the opportunity to learn a little bit more from you and get this insight to your practice. So we want to just close out by talking a little bit, if you can go back down actually to the end of the presentation. We want to talk a little bit about the Barry Art Museum and just a few of the other programs. So you can just kind of click through. Perfect.
Cycle through. Wait, keep.
Yeah, this is perfect. So the next lecture, if you would like to join us, is by an artist named Luke Jerram from the UK. It's November 5th at 6 p.m. right after the elections. You can see a coronavirus there that he'll be talking more about. Next slide, please. On December 3rd, we have Devin Troy Struther, who's also in our collection. He's going to be coming to us live from his studio in LA and talking to us a little bit about his practice. Next slide, please. We have an art-inspired yoga class, which is 30 minutes. It's pre-recorded. You can visit our YouTube channel, see it anytime. This week's is featuring the art of Karen LaMonte. So if you want a little bit more Karen, go back, check it out. And it's a whole studio practice, flow practice that's in front of her piece in our collection. Next slide, please. We have Family Art Days every Saturday at 10 a.m. It's an interactive program which encourages kids and adults to learn about art together with activities, games, songs, all inspired by our exhibits in our collection. And I should mention, oh, next slide, please. And I should mention that all of our exhibitions and programs are completely free. Our current exhibition is by an artist named Joan Thorne, Light, Layers, and Insight. It's a retrospective. Next slide, please. And our upcoming exhibition is Orchids, Attraction and Deception. It opens February 4th and it runs through August 15th. It's exploring the visual allure, cultivation, and some of the colonialism, global warming, and just general allure of orchids. Next slide, please. Our museum is safely open to the public. Our hours of operation are Tuesday through Friday, 11 to 5, and Saturday and Sunday, noon to 5. Face masks are required, but we do offer a completely touchless experience. Next slide, please. And finally, if you enjoyed all of this free programming, please consider becoming a museum member. Thank you so much for your time. Final slide. We really look forward to having you back again. So once again, thank you so much, Karen, for joining us today. And we look forward to the next lecture and to seeing your work right here in Hampton Roads. Please go and enjoy it in a number of the institutions we mentioned earlier on. Okay, everybody, have a wonderful afternoon. And Karen, have a great night. It's nighttime there, right?
Yes, yes, thank you.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Okay, bye.
Bye.